Hello guys, this is me Amani from the Coding Academy by Amani, and welcome back to this series on C programming. In this video, we will learn about if-else statement of C programming. We will start by explaining what is exactly the if-else statements, why do we need them in our program, and after we will do together a lot of code examples. So please keep watching until the end to understand this basic lesson in C programming. So let's get started. Before starting explaining if-else, the first thing that you have to understand is what is exactly the if-else statement and why do we need those statements in our program. So, if-else, or the statement if, is known as a control statement. So, what are those control structures? A control structure is a primary concept in most high-level programming languages. In its simplest word, it's a block of code. So, it's a code. A control structure is a block of programming that analyzes variable and chooses a direction in which to go based on given parameters. So, we will choose the direction of the program. In a program, a control structure determines the order in which statements are executed. Our program so far consists of just list of commands. That means list of order to the compiler. The program cannot choose whether or not to perform a command. So we cannot choose if we will execute this line or not. The program also cannot perform the same command more than one time. So all lines will be executed in the order given to the compiler and just one time. So the solution here, or the problem, sometimes we need to execute a command more than one time, or sometimes we need to ignore some lines. So the solution here is to use the control structures. The control structures allow a program to base its behavior on the value of variables. So we will add some conditions to control the execution order of the program. The control structures type, we have the selection statement, we have the repetition statement. In this video, we will start by the selection statements. The first one, if and if-else. In the others video, we will see for sure the other selection statement and the repetition statement. So let's start with the first control structure, the selection statement, if-else. Inside the if-else statements, we have four types. The first one is if statement, the second one, if-else statement, the third one, if-else later statement, and the last one, nested if-else statement. We will start with the first one, if statement. So the syntax of if statement is, we have if, this keyword if, we open parentheses, we add a test expression, we open the curly braces, we have our statements code, and when we finish, we will close the curly braces. So, how if statement work? If the if statement evaluates the test expression inside the parenthesis. So our code will be based according to this test expression. If the test expression is evaluated to true, so statement inside the if will be executed by the compiler. So the compiler will enter inside this curly braces. If the test expression is evaluated to false, the statement inside the curly braces will not be executed and will be ignored by the compiler. So the compiler will not enter to this code. For example, here we have this line of code. If x is bigger than y, printf x is larger than y. So if this statement is true, if this test expression is true, if x is bigger than y, so the compiler will print x is larger than y. If x is not larger than y, so the compiler will not enter to this statement and will ignore this line of code. Now we will pass to test our if statement by the first code. The first program that we will do together with if statement is to test if a number is positive or not. So the first thing here, let's take a number from user. So we have printf please enter a number. We will take this value from the user, so we have to use scanf. In the previous video we explained what is scanf, what is printf, so please, if you don't understand it, check the other previous video. So here we use a variable called number. We have to come here and declare this variable. Before using a variable we have to declare it, so in number. Now we will use the if statement. We will test if this number is positive or not by respecting the syntax that we showed already. So we have here if, we start by the keyword if. Our condition, what is if the number is bigger or not to 0. So if the number is bigger to 0, we have to write printf you entered a positive number, and let's display also the value %d and /n number. Now let's add another line, for example printf first code with if statement. So here this code, we took a number from a user. Now we will test if this number is positive or not. If this condition is true, if the number is bigger than 0, so the compile will enter in this curly braces and will write you entered a positive number. If this test condition or test expression is negative, is less than 0, the compile will not enter to this line, will jump this line and will come to the following line, printf first code with statement. Let's test this program together, compile and run. Now we have enter a number, for example I will enter 5. As a result, what do we have? 5, it's bigger than 0, so this expression is true. The compile will enter here, you enter a positive number, and what is this number? It's 5. After finishing this, the compile will come to the following line, printf first code with if statement. So we have as a result, you enter a positive number 5, and we have first code with if statement. Now let's try a negative number and to see the result. So execute, compile and run. We have, for example, -5. As you can see here, this condition is not validated, it's not true. So the compiler will not enter here and will not show us the message inside the printf. So it will jump the code, all the code inside the if. The code of if finish here. So it will come and execute this code, which is first code with if statement. So as you can see here, as a result, we just have first code with if statement. I hope you understand the idea of if statement. Now we will pass to see the if-else statement. The second type that we will learn together is the if-else statement. So the syntax of if-else statement is we have the keyword if, we have test expression between parentheses, we open the curly braces, we have to run the code if test expression is true, we close the statement, we have another keyword else, we open the curly brace and we run code if test expression is false. So how if-else statement is working, or how the syntax will be working? We have here, if the test expression is evaluated to true, statement inside the curly braces will be executed and the statement inside the else will not be executed. If the test expression is evaluated to false, the statement inside the body of else will be executed, and the statement between the body of if will not be executed. So let's try the syntax by code. In this example of if-else statement, we will test if a number is odd or even. So the first thing, as usual, let's take a number from user, printf, please enter a number, scanf, %d, and we have address of number. So this entered value by the user will be registered in number. Now we will test if this number is odd or not. So how this number will be odd or even? So if the number, the rest by dividing the number by 2, it's equal to 0, so it's an even number. If the rest is not equal to 0, so it's an odd number. We have a special operation in C that we already talked about in the previous video that we call modulus, that can give us the rest when we divide by another number. So we have here if number mod 2 it's equal to 0. So this is the special operation mod. It will give us the rest when we divide number by 2. Okay, it's equal to 0. So printf %d, this number is an even number, and we have the number here to display the value. Else printf %d is an odd number, and we have number. Here we finish the program. By the way, I remember something that I can tell you here. Maybe in the other channel or in another program, you will see here return 0. Okay, it's a function here. The program can be working without this function, but we have to add it. If we don't add it, the compiler is working well, because this compiler is updated and it can execute without this function. Why I'm not adding this function? Because this function, this word is a function. So it's not logic to add it before explaining to you what is function in C. So when we will be in the video or in the lesson of functions, I will explain it with details. So we can add it, it's not a problem, but I will explain it in the future, okay? So now here, the idea of this program, we have the test expression here, number mod 2, it's equal to 0, so the program or the compile will execute this line, the code inside the if. If this test expression is not true, so the compiler will execute what we have inside the else, so we have this code. Let's execute it together. We have here, please enter number. For example, we have 5. 5 is an odd number, so the compiler will come here, will take a number, it will test this test expression. If the number mod 2 is equal to 0, so 5, when we divide 5 by 2, the rest is 1, so it's not equal to 0. So this expression, this test expression is not true, so the compiler will not enter here, will not execute this code. It will come here and execute the code inside the else, which is the number is odd. Now let's try. Even number. So for example, 8. 8 is an even number. Now the compile come here in this expression. This expression is true, so the compiler will execute the code inside the if and we'll ignore the code inside the else. I hope you understand this example of if-else statement. Now we will pass to the third type. The third type that we will learn together is the if-else later statement. The syntax of this type is as follows. We have if, the first test expression, after we have some statements to execute. The second, else if, so the new keyword here that we will use, else if. We have another text expression, we have another statement to execute. Also we have else if, we have another test expression, we have some statements, and the last we have else statement. So the idea of this if-else later, when we use if-else statement, it executes just two different codes depending on whether the test expression is true or not. But sometimes we have to choose between more than two statements or more than two possibilities. So we have here the if-else laters will allow us to check between multiple test expressions. It can be under 100 test expression, 1000 test expression, 10 test expression, is as you need. Okay, so we have here, for example, in this example, we have 3 test expression. Let's try this together by code. In this example, by using the if-else later, we will test the value of two numbers. If number 1 is equal to number 2, number 1 is bigger than number 2, or number 3 is bigger, or number 1 is less than number 2, sorry. So here, as you can see, we have 3 conditions. So let's start. The first thing here that we will do is to take two numbers from user. So we need two numbers. We have to declare two numbers, number 1 and number 2. We have printf, enter, please enter two numbers. We will use in the same line, or you can use it separately. We have scanf, so we have %d, because we have two numbers, and we have address, number 1, and we have the address of number 2. Now we have the two numbers. Now we will check if those two numbers, for example, the first thing are equals. So if number 1 is equal to number 2, we open the curly braces. What do we have? Printf number, for example, result, printf result, for example, %d is equal to %d. And we have here number 1 and number 2. This is the first if, this is the first test expression. We have printf number 1 are equal to number 2. Now, else if, we will add the second test expression. Our second test expression is if number 1 is bigger than number 2. So if number 1 is bigger than number 2, what the program will display as message, printf result. We can copy it. We will just change the operation. We have is bigger. Okay. Now, the third expression here, we have number 1. If we will test if number 1 is less than number 2. Here we don't need to use another else if, because we have 3 conditions, 2 with expression. The third one we will just add else, because here if the number 1 it's not equal to number 2, number 1 it's not bigger to number 2, so automatically the number 1 will be less than number 2. So we have printf. Let's copy this. Result. Number 1 is less than number 2. Let's check our program if we don't have mistakes. So we have two numbers, number 1 and number 2. We enter two numbers. Here the program will work like that. If number 1 is equal to number 2, if this test expression is true, so the program will execute this line, will ignore all the rest of the code, and will finish the program. Let's add the return 0 that we already talked about. Here we have, if this condition is not true, the program will ignore this line, will jump it, will come here. As if, we'll check this expression. If number 1 is bigger than number 2, so the program will execute this line, will ignore this statement, and will finish the program. But if the number 1 it's not bigger than number 2, so the program will ignore those statements and will come and execute this line of code. Let's try together and see the result. Enter two numbers. So we have, for example, 1 and 1. So we have result 1 is equal to 1. So this first expression is true. The program will execute this line and will finish the program. Let's try another test. We have entered two numbers. We have, for example, 5 and we have 10. 5, it's not equal to 10. This code will be jumped. 5, it's not bigger than 10. This code will be jumped. The code will execute this line. So as you can see here, 5 is less than 10. Now let's try the last test. We have 5, for example, and 2. We have 5 is bigger than 2. I hope you understand this code and the if-else later. Now we will pass to the last type of if statement. The last type that we will learn together is the nested if-else statement. The idea of this nested if-else is to include an if-else statement inside another if-else statement. So as you can see here, we have if we have the first test expression. If the test expression 1 is validated as true, the compiler will execute the code of the nested if-else. So it will come here, it will test another test expression 2. If this test expression 2 is true, so the compiler will execute this statement, as the compiler will execute the second one. If the first test expression 1 is not validated, the compiler will execute the else statement. So let's try this nested if-else together by code. In this exercise, we will see together how to use the nested if-else. So this exercise, it's similar to the previous one. We will test the value of two numbers if they are equal, bigger or small. But here we will use the nested if-else. So here we already took two numbers from user. We have please enter two numbers, number 1 and number 2. Now we will start the nested if-else. So the first thing here, if number 1 it's bigger or equal to number 2. Here in this expression, in this test expression, we have two conditions. We have number 1 it's bigger than number 2, and in the same time we have number 1 is equal to number 2. So this expression, it's if number 1 is bigger or equal to number 2. So here in the nested if-else, we will test separately if number 1 is bigger than number 2 or number 1 it's bigger than number 2. So this expression tells us, if this expression is true, it will tell us number 1 it's bigger or equal to number 2. Now we have to add another test expression that will tell us exactly if the number 1 it's bigger than number 2 or they are equal. Okay, so we have here we will test if number 1 is equal to number 2. We have printf result %d, it's equal to %d, and we have number 1 and number 2. So if number 1 is equal to number 2, the compile will execute this line. Else, if this condition is not true, the compile will come to the else and will write printf. Let's copy this line. It's bigger. Here, why do we have if and we have just else? We don't need to use another else if, because here we have two choices. Number 1, it's bigger or equal to number 2. So under those choice, if number 1 it's not equal to number 2, so automatically it will be bigger than number 2. Here we finish the nested if else. Now we have here, if number 1 is bigger or equal to number 2, if this expression is true, this code, all this code will be executed. If this condition or this expression is not true, so we have to do else. So if this condition is not true, so number 1 it's not bigger than number 2, and number 1 it's not equal to number 2, so what is left? Number 1 is less than number 2. So we will just write printf is less than number 2. And we finish our nested if else. So we took two numbers, we test the first expression, the first test expression. If number 1 it's bigger or equal to number 2, if this expression is true, the compile will come and test exactly if it's equal or bigger. So if number 1 is equal to number 2, the result will be this line. If this test expression is not true, the result will be this line. If this test expression is not true, the result will be in the else. Number 1 is less than number 2. Let's try it together. So we have, please enter two numbers. We have 1 and we have 2. So result 1 is less than 2. So the compile ignore all this code and come to the else. Let's try another code, another result, sorry. We have 1 and 1. So result 1 it's equal to 1. So the compile ignore all this code and execute for us just this line. So I hope you understand the nested if else in this code and the other previous code. If else lesson, it's a basic lesson, so you have to understand it very well, because we will use it in the whole future work in C. So please, if you have any question, do not hesitate to write a comment. If you like the video also, just leave us a like or a comment, and do not forget to subscribe to our channel to get notified for the next video. Thank you so much, and see you in the next video.